friends. Welcome to Think Out Loud with me, a chatcast produced, hosted, and humbly offered by yours truly, Natalie Peterson. From my freezing cold little neck of the woods in northern Colorado to you in yours, wherever and whenever that might be. This little digital adventure is an effort to turn years of internal chatter, wondering, silent suffering, and physical and mental close calls into enlightening and empowering conversations with others. Given how many choices you have about how to spend your time, I honestly, truly consider it an honor that you're listening in. Let's get to it. Thais Harris is a board-certified holistic nutritionist who helps women love themselves into their ideal body, vibrant health, and an outstanding life. She helps women prioritize their well-being while ensuring family and career needs are met. Cultivating deeper self-love as the guiding principle in making dietary and lifestyle improvements. Her clients get crystal clear in their goals, understanding their unique needs with the help of current labs and even DNA reports. Together, Thais and her clients identify priorities and create a custom path forward to end self-loathing and the sabotaging that comes with it, and rediscover vibrant health, transforming their relationship with body, mind, and food. I met Thais as a part of the author group that helped Tina Green, the self-love queen, hey Tina, bring the life-changing power of self-love to life this past November. We reached best-selling status together, and now Thais and I get an opportunity to share extended space learning more about one another's gifts and stories. Please give a warm welcome to Thais. Thais, thank you for being here to think out loud with me.
Yay, thank you so much, Natalie. It's such an honor.
Tell me, in my introduction, we heard the term ideal body. We were visiting just before we hit record about this, and I want to share it more with the folks that are listening. Tell me more about this term ideal body and what it means from your perspective.
Yes, thank you. You know, when I talk about self-love being the guiding principle, I think it can seem like, and then what does ideal body mean in that context of self-love? And it really means discovering what each of our unique ideal bodies are. So it really is about each client led by this guiding principle of bio-individuality and self-love to understand what makes my body function the best. And so it's not an ideal body that's coming in from like a media image standpoint or what your doctor said you should weigh, or even your nutritionist or your smart scale. And I say this because I have a smart scale, and it's funny what the sort of suggestion for a standard body for my height and age. It's actually not a weight that feels right for me with my bone structure and with everything that I do and the muscles that I have and want to have more of. And so it's like we have to really learn to shut down some of the noise from the outside and learn to listen to our bodies and to really get that crystal clarity on how do we want to show up in life? What are the things we love doing? The energy that we want to have, the longevity. And so finding those things will help us fine tune what that ideal body means. And it's not going to be about looking like, for me at least, it's not about looking like Gwyneth Paltrow as much as I think she's very beautiful and is aging beautifully. I am never going to be tall and slender as she is. And so it's really about not comparing and not reaching outside of ourselves, but really going within to learn what ideal means to each of us.
I love that. I relate to that just recently because so much for me relates back to sobriety. And so it's kind of this marker in my life that when I stopped drinking a little over 5 years ago, my body went through this massive change, right? And in addition to not drinking, I was maxed out stress-wise. So I literally shrank down to my high school size. I was not healthy. I was fascinated having exploded in being a not heavy in an uncomfortable way, but in I wasn't ever battling like this self-image thing. I just kind of let myself be who I was. But when I dropped, all of a sudden I had a taste of comparitis of wow, like, and I threw out everything. I threw out all my clothes that I had ever had. And I was like, holy, like, wow. I knew my ego was involved. I knew I can say that now confidently. Um, so I went to that end of the spectrum and dropped to an unhealthy weight, and even had my son and my ex-husband now say something like, you need to really maybe think about what's going on here. And then got to a place where I was a much healthier weight. And by healthy, I mean just for me, like you're saying, an ideal situation for me.
Mm-hmm.
I started a new job 9 months ago. I don't move. I sit at my computer. I've gained weight.
Mm-hmm.
I still have the comparitis going on. I had the taste of being this tiny thing
Right.
and thinking, is this ideal? And so I relate to what you're saying, because now, whereas I mean, I don't feel uncomfortable in my body, but it's this voice that I'm not
Mm-hmm.
used to having in there. And so I can see how someone connects with you just to think through all of that, because I mean, it's the nonstop comparing that we do, right?
And, I love talking about diet as our daily intake of everything. So you think about that acronym, because it's not just what we eat, it's how we eat it, when we eat it, it's the thoughts we're consuming, it's the media we're consuming, the things that are inflammatory, both, food wise, we're putting into our bodies, but what we're putting into our psyches. And I know that, like, the comparison train can be so inflammatory, even when we're comparing ourselves to our earlier selves. I do have clients that feel like they want to be back to what they were in their early 20s, and maybe now they're 50. And it's like, well, where are you now? And what are your needs now? And I think it's so interesting. You started by saying, I don't move, right? I got this new job. And so it sounds like you already have a clue, like maybe it's not really about the weight, but it's if you find a way to just move more so you can feel more embodied, like that alone might not only stop the chatter, that noise, but it will naturally also feel like you're flowing, right? And when we have flow, we can let go of like inflammation or bloating and things like that. And so it may be that what the clue is for you is just like, oh, how do I find time to maybe like play a couple of really fun songs so I can dance before a meal or after a meal, or and that's the cool stuff that I love doing with my clients, is finding out like, so what is the goal? So maybe in this case would be maybe just moving more, just so I can feel
Mm-hmm.
more of my body in a way that feels comfortable. And then how do we make that happen in a way that can be consistent for you? Because
Mm-hmm.
consistency creates transformation. And it's hard if people are just like, I'm going to go to the gym every day. It's like, well, is that doable for your lifestyle right now? Like, no. So let's find a goal that's actually doable. It's like doing calf raises as we're brushing our teeth. Like, one thing. Yeah, I can commit to doing that every day. Okay, great. Then, we can layer other things, or dancing. But back to this notion of like the ideal body is just really learning. Like when I said what we need to have the energy we need, some people are really depleted. And so I've worked with people that are actually underweight too. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and now they don't have enough energy for certain things, or their teeth um, are actually getting destroyed because now their body's soaking, it's like taking calcium from where it has. We ideally don't want to be doing that, right? We want to have enough calcium so that we have enough for the teeth, the bones, and all the other things, or magnesium. Or so it's just interesting to think about this notion of like, we don't want to be depleted and we don't want to be like overstuffed. And so like, what
Mm-hmm.
is that middle ground for each of us? And it'll be different for every person.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with models and actresses. And so I really feel like the self-love piece, even when I'm with someone that seems like they are perfectly fit, and have what sort of media or society would consider like a perfect body, they may be dealing with a lot of things internally where
Hmm.
they don't feel like they are yet in their ideal body, even though to the external world it may seem so. But there are, when we're depleted in certain things, we can start feeling depressed, right? Or anxious. And so there's so much that really is about uniting this gut, heart, mind connection. And then, with the love, starting to make choices that help us feel more whole.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. The gut heart mind connection. I just had a twinkle of a beautiful human, a mentor that I lost a few years ago to cancer. And she was so much about the gut heart mind connection, and,
Mm,
and just the listening, which brings me to thinking about, I think what your magic is, if there's a different way to think about it, is teaching people how to have conversations with themselves. That was one of my
mm,
biggest. I didn't know how to talk to myself.
mm-hmm,
I took direction from society, from media, from still that comparitis type thing, that not enoughness, and so learning how to hear voices and differentiate myself, capital S, from the
mm-hmm,
voices that are just thoughts, right?
mm,
Um, that was a massive process. Having someone like yourself to identify and help put voices into perspective, right? And whose voice are you hearing? Is it your own? And
mm-hmm.
defining ideal according to you and your values, um, is not easy.
Right. And sometimes we have conflicting values. I think being aware of our values in the first place is a huge exercise, and it's so wonderful. I was very lucky. A dear friend of mine, Alejandra Soroka, she taught me a lot about nonviolent communication, and so I studied with her. She is she calls herself a language alchemist, right? She helps people with
Hmm.
their communication patterns. And so I've learned a great deal from her. And this was, many years ago, understanding nonviolent communication and what it means, and how to first and foremost learn to do that for myself, learning where
Mhm.
I was being violent toward myself. And I feel like I share a little bit of this in my chapter in the book, in the the life-changing power of self-love. My chapter was called No More Cringing in the Mirror: What Skin Cancer Taught Me About Self-Love. And I started, just because I had this cue, I had this trigger that was a big black cancerous mole right on my cheek, on my face. I could not see it.
Mm.
And I started noticing all the negative, like violent or at least aggressive thoughts that I would direct at myself every time I saw that. And it really became this question about, like, how can I heal something I hate? Like, we can't heal a body we hate. We have to love it into better health. And so this whole mirror process that I ended up both creating, but also I think um, bringing up from other knowledge I had and other books that I had, and Louise Hay, she has a mirror
Mm.
workbook. And so I feel like all of those things eventually culminated into this practice that then felt right for me at a moment when I really needed it, because I had this cue, this trigger in my face.
Mm.
And it was really deep. I had to, like, both accept reality as it was in that moment, and then love myself regardless of what my face looked like, and not get into all the fear chatter or the aggressive chatter about, like, what does this mean? Oh, it's right in your face. Maybe there's some ugliness about you that, like, now it's coming to
Mhm.
for everybody to see. And what if there's cancer everywhere else? My dad
Mm.
had of a very aggressive form of cancer, and so there were all these fears, and I felt like if I let that be the conversation, if those were the voices in my head that I gave the most attention to, I then it probably would have taken over, right? And it would have, I don't know. And instead, I chose healing and I chose love, and it had to be a very decided choice of doing that as a practice every day, so that I wouldn't let, it was almost like my way of not letting that chatter dominate was by having the opposite conversation, like replacing, creating a new narrative so that I could look at myself and smile at myself and say, hi,
Mm-hmm.
hello, beautiful. I love you. I'm here for you. And it changed, I think it changed everything, you know?
Wow. It makes me sad to think about how this is uh the the emotion in me around how abusive we are to ourselves. We are so critical and so just harsh. And the like, it takes me back to a place of, wearing that when people hear that, when you put voice behind the criticism, the self-criticism and the self-loathing, and you
Mhm.
actually share those pieces that of how harsh you are with yourself, people are like, wow, you seem so happy, you seem so like, I never, you've got this, or you do this, and you don't ever look like you're upset, you're like this optimist and everything is always going so great. And it back to just, those conversations with self, and how many layers we operate under, and what is to be gained by freeing ourselves from those layers. Um, and that takes just an immense amount of work. It is back to your acronym, it's everything that we take in on a daily basis, and committing ourselves to, if it took an entire lifetime, and even into our childhood and our upbringing, and even pre that, if we're talking about emotional inheritance, right? From
Mhm. Yes.
generations before, and gosh, that gets me on a whole nother chain of thinking about my grandma, and what she passed to my mom, and what my mom passed to me, and what I try hard as hell not to pass to my son. Um, that just to undo those layers, it takes just an immense amount of commitment and work, and daily, to
Yeah.
look in your own eyes and believe it.
Yes.
Brings me to tears.
At first we may not believe it. And that's the thing too. And I've had, I do a sort of a breathing exercise or meditation, you might call it, with my clients at every session. And I often invite them to, with hand on the heart, because when we put our hand on our heart for the body, it's like we're receiving a hug.
Mm,
And we can't exactly biologically tell the difference that it's ourselves or somebody else giving us a hug, but we can actually release oxytocin, which is this hormone of love and belonging. So, oh my God, we can do that for ourselves. Just take a deep breath and put our hand on our heart. And so then I invite my clients to think of something they're grateful for, bring something to heart that they're grateful for about themselves or that they love about themselves. And sometimes nothing comes up. And it's, people would be surprised how many people that seem on the outside to be very happy and content, when those moments to say, there's nothing there.
mm,
And then there's a list of inquiry, because we can start, it can be just the smallest thing. It's like, oh, I took the trash out for my neighbor yesterday. Like sometimes I'll start, well, is there maybe an action of kindness you did for somebody else? Or is there this or that, or personality trait, or part of your body? For some people, it's like, oh, the color of my eyes. Whatever, like we can find the smallest thing. I call it gathering evidence, because it's like, oh,
mm,
there it is. There's that. Okay. And then there's the other thing. And then and then all of a sudden we start bringing like the sense of gratitude and appreciation, and that will grow into a bigger love
mm,
always. And so trusting that. And um, going to the mirror and saying, I love you, sometimes we might not believe it. And so, like, what is the smallest kind thing you can say to yourself? and that you can believe. And then we build up from that, you know. I feel like we internalize so many voices, especially in our childhood. Like when we're most open in the world, right? It's like when we're most vulnerable, that's messages come in and we ended up. So, like you said, learning to discern what's like chatter out there and what's my real voice. What are things that we've internalized, sometimes even by modeling. Like my mom was amazing and she was not like overly critical of me, I don't think, but there were things that the way she acted or the way she always said, oh, delete that picture, or oh, this picture is awful, oh, I look ugly, oh, my hair, or like constant digs at herself, right, and her self-image. As kids, like with moms and girls especially, I think we take that in, like that's the way you behave. You're never, happy with your image or how you look. So there's like little things that sometimes are not even directed at us, but that we kind of inherit, like you were saying, even from other generations. And so starting to really like separate that, spending enough time with ourselves and appreciating who we are, how we are in the world, so we can start creating a little distance from those thoughts. And I think before, when I brought in nonviolent communication, we were talking about values. And that was another thing with my work with Alejandro, was like identifying these values. And I often have conflicting ones. So like being really excited to finish a project or finish work or a meal plan and a recommendation I'm making for a client. And that sometimes interferes with my value of having good sleep hygiene so I can get enough sleep, and like my self-care. And I'm starting to learn not to beat myself up when I have these conflicting values. I was just sharing with you before we started recording that last night I had one of those moments where I worked late. It's something I don't want to keep doing again and again. And when I felt myself going into the like, oh, here you are, you're doing this again. You can't take good care of yourself, like the aggressive voice. I had to switch. It's like, how do we have to keep being committed to changing that narrative? And it was like, well, why? Why was I working late? Oh, because I promised something to someone. I'm really excited to share this with that person. I know it's going to help them. They need this information before their trip. Like, it was like, oh, there was so much kind of giving, sort of a generous spirit there. And there was so much about my own integrity with like how I like to work, my work ethic, maybe we'll call it. It's like, oh, I had these other values too. And in that moment, it made sense to stick to those other three values versus just this one value here. And then I could switch into like feeling grateful. Oh, grateful for this new client, grateful for the fact that I can help. Oh, and then like I could go to sleep peacefully and feeling like excited and happy about myself, versus if I had let just the thing about like, oh, you're not taking care of yourself again, you're going to bed late, you're exposed to blue light, blah, blah, blah. Like I know my quality of sleep would have been different because my whole body would have been in this like fight or flight mode, which is what every time we beat ourselves up, we are creating threat to our body. And so biologically, we respond to it as a real threat. And then everything gets tight. It has cardiovascular repercussions. It has, microbiome response to when our bodies are like that. Everything. Like there's like 10 different biological ways in which when we are being harsh to ourselves, beating ourselves up, or even getting into self-loathing, which I know it's a very loaded word. And some people say, oh, I don't loathe myself. I love myself. But even in the smaller microaggressions of beating ourselves up, we can create this imbalance biologically that I think it's so worth it to commit to changing that, to replacing the icky stuff with some like loving, kind thoughts. And it's not just positive thinking. It's really about resourcing a different kind of strength and a different kind of peace to let our bodies know it's okay. It's okay to heal right now. It's okay to digest. It's okay to love.
Every single solitary day, we are these exquisite, fascinating, functioning beings that have, there's the physicalness of us, just the fascinating that it all knows what it's doing. I mean, and I'm talking in absolutes for the sake of my example. And our thinking selves to be witness to that, right? Separate from our physical selves, to be able to engage in a thinking manner about the wonder of what's happening, starting fresh every single day, right? And all of the variables. I think there's such a challenge that we face in this black or white, this or that, commit or don't commit, shit or get off the pot. It's like we put ourselves in these we entrap ourselves with these expectations. And even when we don't mean to, it's just the way that we're conditioned. And I think what you're describing is beautiful, because as we were visiting about just being able to take a step, in my mind, if I envision it, it's like a step back and up, and to be able to engage with ourselves in a much more gosh, what am I trying to say? Like just a much more free flowing, liquid way, that depending on the day, values are going to rearrange themselves depending on the variables that enter into the day. Our child might need our attention, our client. So giving ourselves grace and giving ourselves room to be the physical human, the emotional human, the spiritual human, and getting up every day. It's practice. It's a beautiful dance that we're blessed with. This is what we do on a daily basis is freaking amazing to me.
I know, right?
It gives me like goosebumps to think about just what is us. The fact that we can sit here and think about what is us. Like I have goosebumps on my brain. It's crazy to think about.
I love that. Goosebumps in my brain.
The other vision I have, and I'd love for you to just think more on it, is this is kind of a common theme across all this, is that where did you get to the point? For me, in recovery and not only from addiction, but just in life in general, my hand was out, my hand was out, my hand was out. And I had beautiful, the story of the background of this podcast is my hand out to these beautiful humans in all walks of life, from chiropractors to astrologists to Reiki to, personal trainer, whatever the case is, my hand out, to finally get to a point where not only I'll never not have my hand out, because there's always something to be learning and elevating and enhancing about myself, but to finally get to a point where my other hand can reach back and I can put my hand in somebody else's and say, I got you. I'm confident enough in my own. I'm never going to not have this hand extended, because I am always learning. But I finally have my legs about me and my wits about me, that I can turn around and confidently hold my hand out for others. Did you grow into this space? Does that resonate with you, and how?
Oh, so much, and especially over the last few years, I think I've been also actively seeking more teachers, coaches. And one of my coaches actually said something like, everybody can progress, evolve. Everybody has everything they need built in to themselves to do so. It's just that sometimes if you go at it alone, it's like walking a 1,000-mile journey. And when you have a coach, a teacher, a support person, you can take the jet plane. And I love that because it is. It's like I feel we are definitely, sort of community beings. We really felt that, especially with COVID, right? Like what happens if you take away a community of people? What happens if you take away interaction? And I think we're really built to like learn from each other and grow and support each other because as we support others, we grow. I have learned so much from my clients. It's not a one-way street. Like when I'm working with people, it's not like I'm all of a sudden, like the expert who's guiding them.
Hmm.
One, they are the expert in their own experience. And I rely heavily on a bunch of questionnaires because of that reason. Yes, we can look at labs and DNA and all these other things that are like little pieces of the whole picture, but their experience of themselves in this moment is like the biggest part. And but they've taught me so much. And I taught nutrition at Bowman College, which is where I studied nutrition. And I was incredibly lucky that I got to be faculty there a few years after I graduated. And again, I learned from my students almost, I think as much as I was teaching. And I feel like this ability to have our hand up, I mean, getting help is so fundamental, I think, to not just get there faster, but to get there with like a more open perspective and getting other people's, because we have our, sometimes we have our blinders on, we have our spots, like what do you call the spot, the blind spot?
Hmm.
Yes.
Hmm.
We all have those that we can't see. And so having that hand up so that it makes us so much stronger to be able to reach and help others.
Hmm.
And, I feel like too, I moved to the US when I was 19. I grew up in Brazil and alone. So it was a big, bold move. And I think having self-reliance is really important. And I've been actually, thinking a lot about that and writing about that and figuring out like what are the places where I've collected evidence in my own life that like the message that I can.
Mm.
Um, because when I'm feeling down or feeling like, oh, I'm not where I want to be, or like I haven't reached this and this goal, or whatever the things that I'm just feeling down about, and that sense of like I'm not enough and I can't do enough or be enough. I look back at these moments of like, wait a minute, look at the evidence, like make a different case here. And maybe it's just not the right time for certain things to happen. But yes, you can, and yes, you have. And I think when you pair that self-reliance with being open to receiving help and to receiving guidance, that's a great combination. And I think
Hmm.
we all probably do, but in various parts of my life, I've resisted one or the other. And so that's, when things maybe get done, but they feel incomplete.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, that's what I mean. So much of it is like, I don't need help. I don't need help. I don't need help. I got this. I got this. I got this.
Mm-hmm.
And man, the relief that floods through you when, I mean, it's damn near orgasmic when you finally let go and be vulnerable. Like truly let
Yes.
let somebody in,
Yeah.
right? Um, what was the process like writing the chapter with Tina? Was that there was a ton of vulnerability in your chapter, and I'm just curious um, about the journey that you had in writing and putting that
Mm.
story out to the world. Um,
Yeah. I imagine you've heard people say this too, like to write from your scar, not to write from your wound, which means when things are still really fresh and open, it can be really hard to talk about them. And it's almost like scratching like a wound that's not quite healed yet, there's more blood, it gets messy. And I feel like the timing of this book was perfect because by the time it came around, I was ready to talk about it. And
mm,
I'm very lucky. All of these skin cancers were superficial, so it wasn't, I guess, the kind of skin cancer that would have metastasized, for example. And even saying that, it's funny in my head. I'm like, yeah, but it's still, it's like, it's your experience, because some people are like, well, was that really cancer if they were superficial? And
Totally.
it's just a bizarre thing in our society, that people would even ask that, because it's like, well, and my doctor, remember the first cancer, the one that was on my cheek that was very visible, was a squamous cell carcinoma. And my doctor said to me, if you're gonna have cancer, this is the best one to have, which was both, made me go like, what are you saying to me? And then going, oh, I guess that means I don't have to worry about it so much. Like, so it was just one of those weird comments that had a good side and a weird side. Um, but after doing my practices and, this little cancer actually came out in my fingertips after a little over 2 weeks of me doing the smear work and sending my breath to it. I was the nutrition manager for an organization called Series Community Project, and they provided meals for people in cancer treatment. We worked with teens in our kitchen. So our teens were being trained from garden to table, literally from like growing organic food to making food to presenting food. And they knew that what they were making was contributing to people's lives. So these teens in this program, they were so incredible. And you could see just the um, growing like a few inches taller every time a client would come and meet with us and look at them and say, "You saved my life." It wasn't just the food, it was knowing that complete strangers cared enough to make me food so I could go through treatment. And so I remembered as I was, dealing with this image thing and looking at the mirror, looking at my pictures and going, I want to delete them all, because of that. Squeamy. I eventually named him Squeamy because I had to have a relationship with it. And so I talked to it and I was like, okay, what are you trying to tell me? Oh, you're just there. Like, okay, there was some imbalance, Yes, I was exposed to sun a lot growing up in Brazil and being as pale as I am. I got sunburned a lot as a
Mm.
child. Like, so that was like the cycle of the 30 years, of a trigger for some skin stuff to happen. So I understood it in kind of a more like scientific level. And then I had to understand it from more of my soul level. And I remembered this doctor when I worked at Series, and I don't remember the name of the doctor, but he talked about his success rate with pediatric oncology that he attributed to helping the children breathe and create this huge light that they would then point to the spot they were being treated at, like a laser beam, like the Star Wars swords, a laser beam into that spot. And all of a sudden, one day I was looking at myself in the mirror and I remember that. And I was like, oh, why don't I do that? Like I'm a huge believer in the power of breath and visualization. And so I started visualizing this light that I would literally grow with every breath and grow into my belly. And then I would shoot that light into that spot in my face.
Wow.
Essential oils that I had read about. And I just had, I would touch it from the outside in, send the breath from the inside out, imagine it clearing. And after just over 2 weeks, it literally popped off into my hands. And I had at that point already made an appointment with a doctor. I was in Copenhagen at the time. And when I brought it in for her to see, and I saved Squeamy, I brought it in and I said, I think I healed myself, doctor. And she said, oh, it doesn't work like that. And she looked and she said, we still should do surgery to take out the area of like an error margin of error, because it could still be there. It's not very conspicuous. She couldn't see it with her little dermatoscope, but she said, let's do it. And so I said yes, because there's, the fear of, well, what if there's, and so now I had this huge, my face got so swollen. I looked like I was in a bar fight. I had all this pain and it looked like nothing had ever happened after this thing popped off. And the whole sample was 100% clear. And I was grateful because I could actually know for sure that process had really happened and it had healed, whether it was my own doing or if that was going to happen anyway, who knows? but I felt so empowered. And then for the next 2 years, I had other spots and other kinds. I had the basal cell carcinoma and a melanoma. And I opted to have surgery. But for every surgery, I was beaming my light at it before, after, or during. I healed super fast from those. And that's then the timing of the book of like writing from the scar, not the wound. I really felt that I had enough distance from that, especially the first one, to be able to really look back at it and share openly about it, and there's some vulnerability there, but I feel very grateful that I have like a happy ending story to share from. Um, yeah. And so I was very happy to be able to talk about that. And I still have some concerns around even telling people like, yeah, you can breathe into something and you can heal from the inside out, because especially as a health professional, I have a huge responsibility that I take very seriously, that people do see their doctors and do see all the avenues that are established in our culture as like the right way to do things. So I'm very cautious, I guess, about that, but it felt really important to also share from my heart and share the experience that I went through, which doesn't mean that it's going to be anybody else's experience, but to say, I think we are so much more powerful than we think we are. And I feel like I'm just starting to get a glimpse of that in my own life.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's beautiful. I totally hear you. I can imagine that, like, as a cancer survivor myself, and having gone just the cut it out of me, get rid of it. I don't even like, and I was in a much different place than I am now, but I understand what you're saying in terms of like, I go back to that. And if I knew then what I know now, would I have made the same decisions that I made to cut it out and do what I did? I don't know, but it to have the input and to have the relationship with someone who can help you hear turn up the volume on the voice, that you can help the healing process, even
Right.
up to and including completely, it's not it goes back to, it's not a competition. Like, I think
Right.
that's,
It doesn't have to be at
it doesn't
or.
have to be either. Like, Western medicine has its place. We are fantastic. Like, the progress and the tremendous research and just fascinating shit that we can do in Western medicine.
Yes.
Eastern medicine, like, wow, right? I've started to dabble in that. And then just those of us, inside our own healing mechanisms that we haven't even started to touch on. We're dabbling in it, right? And so I hear you loud and clear in terms of, I guess I want to tell you, like, the word cautious, I hear that, and I just want to tell you to pour more of it, not to replace someone. You're not trying to replace Western medicine or give somebody medical advice, but you're a walking, living example of what it means to believe in yourself and to believe in your healing power. And your story is awesome. It's incredible. So I'm just grateful to have, um, it's amazing to me, in a place of gratitude, that my journey has allowed me to cross paths with just some really awesome people, just incredible, like, to share space with you, and to have you as a person, a human in my sphere, is a blessing. And so I want to say an absolutely sincere thank you,
Thank
just
you so much.
for being you. You're a badass, and I'm really grateful. If you're if my folks out there that are happening to listen into this episode, and I hope a ton of folks will, if they're in a space where they're ready to boost self-love, they've got questions around food, the concept of diet, the acronym, daily intake of everything, they should be in touch with you. They can experience you. There's a number of ways to do that, right?
Yes.
Nourish Together is your company name. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
So website is nourishtogether.com. And then that floats to Instagram. Your handle there is nourish.together to find you there. And then Nourish Together on Facebook. You've got some really cool free stuff to even experience you, like a
Yes.
guide, right?
Yeah, and if they go to the website at nourishtogether.com, there will be a little pop-up that says, the 3 mindset shifts for loving ourselves into better health is one thing you can download. There's certain pages that might have other little offerings. So there's a lot of ways to engage through there. And then on Instagram, love to, connect with people there. I'm often posting little videos and tips and inspiration and some personal stuff too, because I feel like I am, that's me. Like you get me when you work with me, this is it. And so I love sharing. Um, yeah, openly.
Wonderful. And you're in Northern California?
Well, I moved.
You
So I
did. Where'd you
went
move
to the
to?
Berkshires. I'm in Massachusetts, and a little area called the Berkshires. It's about as far west as you get in Massachusetts before you hit New York.
Huh.
And it's a lovely, sweet little area. And I joke that it's Sebastopol East because it's a lot like where I was in Northern California. And but with like ski mountains and very cold.
Yeah.
So,
And you're
but
there
it's,
with your family and that's awesome.
yeah, my son and my husband, and we actually moved during the pandemic. So it was July 2020 when we did the move, and it was wild. And we had been planning to move because of the fires. We were
Oh yeah.
very happy in California, but 2017, and then, which was the big one in Santa Rosa, we had left San Francisco and moved an hour north to just have just an attempt of having a different quality of life and a different pace. And then I got the job at Ceres Community Project, which was just 20 minutes away in Sebastopol. Um, but then in 2017, one of the biggest fires in California happened right there in our town.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pretty traumatic experience. And 6 months later, there was a fire across the street from my house. And then in 2018, another fire nearby where it rained ashes for a couple of weeks. And the air quality was terrible. And that's when we realized this is not sustainable. And thank goodness it hasn't been that bad
Mm-hmm.
the last couple of years. And I really love California and have such a beautiful community there. And I hope that it stays beautiful and safe and wet and all of those things. But for us, it just became a time of moving and being closer to family and other things that brought us this way.
Yeah. Well, and then COVID launched us into this type of connection, right? What did we do before
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
digital this digital connection that allows us to be in the same space? And which took a minute. It did take a minute to figure out how to authentically, it's
Yeah.
weird to say digital and authentic in the same sentence. But I think that it's possible. And if it weren't for that, I've never laid eyes on you in human form. It's only been in this digital form.
Right.
That's crazy. It's just crazy to think about that. But
Wow.
um, well, thank you. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to Thais Harris and I think out loud about life and love and self-love. It fills my soul to share space with you, Thais. Thank you. And thanks,
Likewise.
listeners. Please continue to tune in, keep an eye out for when. And until then, take care of you. Big hugs, big love. Be kind to one another. Bye.
Yes. Thank you so much. And as we say in Brazil, ciao.